So I think we can start. In the meantime, some data and research. I quickly introduce myself. My name is Francesco Giassi, and I work as Knowledge Management Officer at the Protection Division at the IUM HQ. And I have the pleasure to moderate today's webinar on behalf of one of the two ICATs co-chairs this year, the International Organization for Migration. So before handing over to our excellent speakers, please allow me to share a few words about ICAT and the series we inaugurate today. As many of you may know, ICAT stands for the Interagency Coordination Group Against Trafficking in Persons. It is a United Nations policy forum formally established in 2007 with a mandate from the General Assembly to improve coordination and cooperation on preventing and combating trafficking in persons. The group operates under the continuous overall coordination of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC. ICAT has an overall plan of action focusing on 6 priority areas, one of which is building an evidence base on trafficking in persons. The group's annual activities, however, are shaped by its chairs, which are elected on annual basis. This year's co-chairs are the International Organization for Migration, as mentioned, and the Office of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children. As part of our co-chairing work plan, we are, among other things, focusing on promoting data innovations and providing thematic guidance on research on trafficking in persons. And this webinar series aims to do exactly that. A cross-cutting issue for all activities this year is child protection, capitalizing on the status and expertise of our esteemed co-chairs. As today is the International Day for the Protection of Children, I take indeed the opportunity to congratulate you all and to gratefully acknowledge the work many of those present here do to promote and protect the rights of children. There will be 6 webinars in the series held between June and November 2023, and covering topics ranging from trafficking in persons, data collection tools and data visualization to trafficking in persons research gaps and dilemmas. Each webinar will be around 45 minutes to 1 hour and will feature short presentation of examples of current work on these topics, followed by a question answered and discussion. Different time zones will also accommodate it as much as possible, and today's webinar, for example, will be held twice, including later today at 4 p.m. Presentations will be recorded and also made available online for the benefit of all those of you who could not attend at these times. After this brief intro, I am moving now to some housekeeping rules. If you experience any technical issue with this webinar session, please don't hesitate to write in the chat, and the webinar administrator will try to address them promptly. After the presentation, if you'd like to ask questions or make a comment, please raise your hand and you will be given the floor. Of course, you are also very much welcome to share your comments and questions in the chat throughout the webinar anytime. All the materials related to the presentation, along with the webinar recording, will be uploaded to NOTS, which is the UNODC Knowledge Center on Human Trafficking and Migrant Smuggling, the platform which is hosting this series of webinars. They will also be made available on the ICAT website at a later time. So after this not brief introduction, we start our conversation today, and let me introduce our first speaker. Is Dr. Fabrizio Sarrica, the team leader on research on trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants at UNODC Research and Trend Analysis Branch. Fabrizio, thank you so much for being here with us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francesco, and I would like to take the opportunity to express a word of gratitude to the dear colleagues and friends in IOM and UNODC to have organized this series of ICAT webinars, and of course this one in particular. Good morning, everyone. I understand actually there are people attending the webinar from all over the world, so good morning or good afternoon according to your time zone. And I'm very happy to talk in this webinar, and I will talk for the next 15 minutes about a joint research work or a joint project that we have developed together, IOM and us in UNODC. I'm very let's say happy and proud of this joint program or joint activity that we are doing together, because this is something that we have developed in the light of coming up with is one of those activities where we have together try to come up with something that is useful, is needed, and something that makes sense for the international community in the field of data collection on trafficking in persons. Let me share my screen. I'm talking about these international classification standards for administrative data on trafficking in persons. Let me see if I managed to, to start the slideshow. So what we are talking about is to create standards that are internationally recognized for national institutions, national authorities, or other actors that collect data on trafficking persons. Both in UNODC and IOM, years ago, we started receiving requests for capacity building trainings on administrative data on trafficking in persons, sometimes from the same countries, maybe different institutions in the same country. So UNODC, we were delivering our trainings, IOM delivering IOM trainings, and we soon realized that we needed to get together, come up with something that was standard, that was harmonized, so that different authorities around the world could have the same trainings, could collect data with the same indicators and having the same standards. So we have developed this ICS-TIP that will soon be published and available. In the meantime, we already have started to conduct joint trainings in this field of work. So when we talk about administrative data on trafficking in person, administrative data in general, are informations that are collected by those institutions that, for their, let's say, proper competence and role, they have direct contact with trafficking in persons events, with trafficking, with victims of trafficking in persons, or with the offenders of committing trafficking in persons, and they are, let's say, registering, recording those activities that they are operating in their daily work. So we are talking about law enforcement activities, we are talking about social workers, we are talking about any other institutions that are in a way on their day-to-day operation recording, conducting anti-trafficking activities and recording those activities. So when we talk about administrative data, we are talking about official recordings in their anti-trafficking operations. So normally this sort of information is not used for, or the primary reason to collect this information is not research. But of course, it's also solid information, and information that, if properly used, can be used for research purposes. And I brought here some examples. Of course, we have the Global Report on Trafficking in Persons for UNODC. Of course, we have the CTDC online platform of IOM, but we also have some very good national, let's say, reports. I put here two of the most famous, and those that are probably paved the way on this along these lines. That is the Dutch National Rapporteur and the Bundeskriminalamt report on trafficking in persons, and they are all based on so to say administrative data that have been collected for different purposes. Of course, the German Bundeskriminalamt report is collected by the police. The Dutch National Rapporteur has its own different institutions or subjects that feed into the national report. The Global Report on Trafficking in Persons collecting information from different institutions all over the world, and so forth. So we are having different examples of data, administrative data, that is collected by different institutions. We realize that different institutions, even in the same countries, were collecting, recording information about trafficking events, or the victims of trafficking, or the perpetrators of trafficking, with different standards in different ways. And of course, this was a challenge because the different systems were not communicating. And we could not also, let's say, there were challenges in sharing this information at international level. So the idea of having these international standards was developed in the attempt to overcome this obstacle, coming up with similar or with the same indicators all over the world across different institutions. Of course, in the as often let's say as often happens when implementing an idea, then we had to face a lot of challenges that we address in the ICS-TIP, such as privacy is one of the most relevant concern and challenges that we had to face and that we address in the ICS-TIP. The implementation of this project started in late 2019, just before the pandemic started, and we had constant we had a constant engagement with those national institutions that do collect data from different parts of the world. So we had bilateral calls that were informing the research team, bilateral calls that were at the base of this of the ICS-TIP, but also we had workshop, a very extensive workshop with all the authorities and institutions, with academic experts, and with experts from international organizations. So this ICS-TIP is really the result of a consultative work with the national authority and those experts from all over the world that do this work, understanding what works, what do not works, what is relevant to collect, what is not relevant, what is feasible actually to collect. We had also trainings and developed pilot trainings in implementing to implement this ICS-TIP, one in particular with the African Union, joint trainings that we have conducted. I think it was in the summer of 2020, UNODC and IOM jointly with the African Unions to their member states of the African Union. The characteristic, of course, and I'll go quickly to conclude, the characteristic of the ICS-TIP is that they are fully in line with the ICCS. What is the full ICCS is the International Crime Classification Standards. Those are standards that the idea is again to have administrative data on crime statistics that are harmonized and standards. These ICCS have been approved by the United Nations Statistical Division. So the ICS-TIP are somehow connected and in line with the ICCS. And the idea, of course, will be to present the ICS-TIP to the UN statistical divisions. And I think that one of the main characteristics of the ICS-TIP is that somehow can be adopted and adapted to different level of development of the counter-trafficking institutions we refer to. So we will have, let's say, core data to collect for those institutions that have very low capacity, but also, let's say, more aspirational, so more indicators for the institutions that have already a lot of data capacity in terms of recording information. It is based on the principle that the unit of analysis is the case of trafficking. So one event of trafficking, one event that is recorded by that institution. So one event is then leads to the victim. One event may have one victim or more victims, may have one perpetrators or more perpetrators, and of course the reporting entity. And then collecting the indicators concerning the profile of the victim, the profile of the perpetrator, and of course the characteristic of the reporting entity. Every indicator is then listed in the ICS-TIP, whether it is the gender identity, the sex, the age of the victims, and so forth. I mean, I will not go in the details, but we don't have, because we don't have time right now. But of course, the ICS-TIP is coming up with the list of indicators that are needed. And as said before, we have different levels. So we go from the most needed, the core indicators, but then we have for step 2, so those indicators that would be good and required to collect. And the step 3 are those that are more advanced, aspirational, as said. Let's say, so those information that would be needed in terms of having more and more information and solid data that are, of course, needed for evidence-based responses. And on that note, I'll close here, and I pass the floor to my colleague, to IOM colleague Claire. Thanks.
Thank you, Fabrizio. I indeed thank you so much for your comprehensive presentation. Quickly giving the floor to Claire, data scientist, Madame Claire Gallet-Davis, data scientist with the Protection Division at the International Organization for Migration. Claire, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesco. Can you see my screen? Because it doesn't seem.
Yes,
I'm not sure I'm
can.
showing. Yeah, perfect. So hi everyone, thank you Francesco and Fabrizio. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you again for this opportunity to present. We're very grateful. So as Francesco said, I'm Claire from IOM headquarters. I've been working with Fabrizio on the ICS-TIP, and along with other colleagues, including my colleague Stine Lawson, who will be presenting this afternoon. So I will now make presentation full screen. So I think Fabrizio's made a pretty convincing case that standards are very much needed to support effective and consistent data governance at all the stages of the data lifecycle. They're crucial, but they're a big part of the picture, but there's another part of the picture. And this is the purpose of the guidance manual. It has two main goals. First is to support the standardization of administrative data, so using ICS-TIP, helping people, support people in implementing the ICS-TIP. But it's also a second purpose, more broadly, to support efforts to improve data collection, management, sharing, and use. And the overall end goal is that in the end, more high quality data can be leveraged, can be used safely and ethically in order to inform policy and programming. So here I should also flag that this manual specifically targets the central government agencies or organizations that have a coordinating role at the national level. It's those organizations that use administrative data on trafficking in persons from different sources to produce evidence to address trafficking in persons. So depending on the context, that can be, for example, the national rapporteur, that can be a national statistical office, depends on which country. In any case, while the manual is primarily targeted to them, it will be useful for all stakeholders dealing with administrative data. Now I'm going to quickly go through the different chapters of the guidance manual. It follows the data lifecycle, which is shown on the slide. I mean, I know it doesn't look so much anymore like a cycle, but this is the steps that we followed, and hopefully it makes a bit more sense as well as to the TIP data cycle. So the guidance starts by going through the data collection and sourcing processes. And of course, that includes using the ICS-TIP. It's a big part of it, but it's broader. It also flags the need to identify objectives in order to collect the right data, especially in the first step. Maybe the data collection does not need to be so comprehensive. Then it also flags common challenges that can come up so they can be anticipated. That can be, for instance, double counting. It can be ensuring that there is a legal basis for using the data, or differences in legal definition, heterogeneous data sources, and so on. And then it also shows the importance of respecting ethical principles, including the do no harm principle, consent, protection of privacy, etc. And lastly, it gives some useful considerations and tips on fostering trust and collaboration and supporting primary data collectors. So these are the people who are actually collecting the data that the national agency will then source. Next, we go into data governance. So data governance is essentially like governance in any other domain. It entails establishing policies and ensuring their consistent and effective implementation. And so to support this process, we need to define a data governance framework that will outline and define clear procedures, the rules, and the roles and their responsibilities. For example, roles can be the data steward. Who is going to be the data steward? What's going to be their responsibility? Rules can be in what circumstances can data be shared? How can it be shared? And then, of course, a data governance framework should include a process for decision-making that is inclusive of all relevant stakeholders. This part also has a section on navigating interagency context, as is often the case with trafficking in persons. Then we go into data sharing, how to safely share data. And on this, we drew on our experience with the CTDC, the Counter-Trafficking Data Collaborative. So the chapter, of course, starts by defining basic concepts basic types of data, but then we also provide concrete methods such as, well, basic aggregation of data, but also k-anonymization and synthetic data. And we also highlight the benefits and limitations of each to help inform which technique to use and in which cases. But then it's also useful to flag some due diligence considerations. What questions should you ask yourself before sharing any data? In particular, there's a notion of a risk-benefit analysis. Is sharing data risky? What is a risk? What is the likelihood? What is the benefit of sharing data? How useful is it going to be, etc. And last but not least, we end the guidance on data analysis and presentation, specifically, of course, trafficking data. And for this, it's useful first to situate trafficking in persons administrative data in the wider evidence landscape, in particular survey data. And from this, we can also draw the strengths and limitations of administrative data. What can it be used for what conclusions can be drawn from analysis of administrative data? There is often the example of using administrative data as representative of the whole trafficking in persons population, whereas administrative data is only, we know what the people who come into contact with the system and who are recorded. So that's one of the examples that we go through in these parts. So at this stage, so this is it for the guidance manual, and it's a lot already, but I'd like to point out that this manual proposes no universal standardized methods for dealing with administrative data on trafficking, simply because there is no one-size-fits-all approach. We've seen that in the consultations, in the workshop, and in the trainings. All the contexts, all the different countries are very different. They have different agencies, different legislative contexts, and so on. But instead, what we try to do is to provide guidance, to provide useful considerations, and also concrete examples of how it's been done in other countries, of what seems to be working, and so on. What are the next steps for ICS-TIP? Well, first, we'd like to make it both the ICS-TIP that Fabrizio talked about and guidance that I talked about. Both of them, we'd like to make them available online as working documents, hopefully very soon. Then we have more trainings planned, and we're going to launch an e-learning course. Then we're planning additional consultations with national statistical offices and trafficking agencies that will lead to the very last revisions of the documents in view of a submission to the UN Statistical Commission. Now, you thought my presentation was finished. It's not. But so far, we've talked about material that's mostly targeted towards central agencies. I've said it will be useful to a lot more people, but that's the main target, central government agencies that source administrative data and then use it and analyze it to build a national picture. But what about civil society organizations? What about the people who are assisting victims, for example, and collecting data on the front line? So here, IOM developed the Human Trafficking Case Data Standard, or HTCDS. HTCDS is a global reference for consistently defining, managing, and processing victim of trafficking case data. The aim of that initiative is to provide standards and resources for frontline organizations and the technologists who are configuring and administering case management systems. And so, accordingly, the target is those frontline organizations and the technology providers and software vendors. But here I would like to flag that these agencies, these frontline agencies, they need case management systems in order to manage all the information that's associated with the different protection and support processes that they're involved in. And this can be initial identification, referral, needs assessments, but also reintegration support and long-term follow-up. For all these processes, you need to collect, maybe share, refer, all kinds of information. And so we need a kind of system to manage all that information. which are the ones we call the case management systems. These systems can be built with different kinds of technologies, with different kinds of requirements. And in turns, there are many different kinds of frontline agencies operating in different contexts and therefore with different requirements. So they'll be using probably different kinds of technologies which have different trade-offs and long-run implications. But nevertheless, despite all of these differences, there'll be a lot of overarching needs that they all have in common. And this is why we developed the HTCDS. We put forward this toolkit to address needs in a manner that promotes existing international standards, so it's aligned with ICS-TIP, but is also open source, open access. You'll see that the HTCDS is freely available online. It's hosted on GitHub, and we hope that the elements are taken forward and co-developed by the community. We hope to create this kind of community of practice that can share resources, share code, improve code in an iterative manner, and so on. And now I'll give a bit more detail about the HTCDS before concluding the presentation. So as I said before, the HTCDS is freely available on GitHub. I can click and show you quickly where it is. I know it can look a little scary if you're not used to GitHub, but it's once you get used to it, it is fairly straightforward. In particular, you can navigate. These are different files. These are folders that you can click through and explore, and so on. And I encourage you to do that if HTCDS is something you're interested in. But there are three main parts to the HTCDS. Obviously, there's a lot of guidance and documentation to go through, and I won't go through that here. But we also have a field standard and a toolkit. The field standard is essentially a spreadsheet that lists all fields that a frontline agency might want to collect that might be relevant for them to collect, as well as the format in which it can be collected. And of course, all this is aligned with the ICS-TIP. And then a toolkit is a set of tools to help organizations set up a case management system, and possibly also to align with the HTCDS standard. And it is intended to support different case management approaches to fit different contexts. So you'll see that we have an Excel template, an XLS form survey template, and a Salesforce package. Here, I'd like also to flag that the point of the HTCDS GitHub page is not to share data. This question has been raised a lot in the various webinars or trainings that we've had. We do not want people to share their data on the GitHub page. On the contrary, we share these tools with the community, and they can then download it and use it on their own systems, whether it's a cloud, computer, I don't know. But yeah, just to emphasize that we are not looking at using this for sharing data. For this is the CTDC, the Counter Trafficking Data Collaborative, but it's a whole different process. I think this is it. Just a quick word maybe on the trainings and dissemination. So we developed a training package that we've already rolled out with 20 frontline organizations. And we designed it in partnership with Freedom Collaborative and Recollective. And we've also developed a free self-paced e-learning course that's available online. And I put again the link on the slide. So in conclusion, I know Fabrizio already highlighted why administrative data are important, what can be done with it, but we wanted to also end on a reminder of what can be achieved with administrative data and how much more could be done with more and better data. I've put, of course, a global report on trafficking in persons, the CTDC that you know already. I've also put a report that we've worked with the World Bank. And finally, I've also included reports by Blue Dragon, which is an NGO in Vietnam. And this report is based on their analysis of their victim database, which IOM helped strengthen during the HTCDS project. You'll see HTCDS being cited in there. That's it for my presentation. So I thank you very much for your attention. And I'll hand it over now to Francesco. I believe we can now open the floor to questions. Thank you very much.
Indeed, thank you so much, Claire, for guiding us through the manual, the human trafficking case data standards, and going back to the manual. The point that you highlighted, I think would be important to remake it here, is that there is no universal method, but of course there is guidance, there is support through examples and practices. So after this, we can start our question and answer session. Probably to start the conversation, I have a couple of questions for our panelists, and I will start from this. If a government is interested to adopt the ICS-TIP, how should it go about it, and which are the implementation steps that have to be taken? Please feel free to Claire or Fabrizio to start. Over.
Thank you, Francesco. And Fabrizio, I'll let you chip in afterwards, of course. But I think a first step for now is to reach out to either Fabrizio or me, or both of us and the team, and we can have a look at it together. We are also in a process of fundraising for any future activities related to this. But it's very good to hear if there's any interest, and we're very happy to discuss it together. Fabrizio, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just exactly wanted to say that we have developed a global joint program, a training program to implement the ICS-TIP all over the world. So of course we are in the process of fundraising, and national authorities that are interested at the moment can get in touch with us, and we will open it. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, colleagues, for addressing the questions. We have one from Madame Rudenko asking to the panelists if it's possible to elaborate a bit more on the steps you plan to take to promote the implementation of the tool among the governments.
Yeah, I think that, as said, at the moment we have developed a concept note to implement a global program, especially in low and medium income countries. But having said that, we have already conducted trainings, and training modules have been implemented, and also we have conducted some pilot trainings in the African Union. So we could do it we did it, we have been doing this, and we can do it at any point. Claire?
Thank you. Yeah, so we've done a few trainings. We have a few more planned, including one in a week and a half. We're trying to present take these opportunities, which is also why we're very grateful to present it and advertise it, so to speak. And then hopefully once we also go through the submission to the UN Statistical Commission, which will involve review with national statistical offices, and then hopefully the endorsement, it will also give more visibility. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Claire and Fabrizio, for addressing the questions. I would like to ask you if you could, it's possible to elaborate a bit more on which are the areas of main concern when we talk about a lack of data in the context of the stakeholders that may be interested in these tools. There could be target countries or areas of main concerns. Over.
Do you mean concerns where do we lack data in particular, whether it's
Correct.
specific
Yes.
countries or populations?
Yes.
Well, I think today being the special day for it, I'd say data on children is often difficult to find, especially with regards to survey. And it is one of the strengths of administrative data, actually, because the organizations who collect administrative data tend to come across children more than in surveys, for example. And in particular, CTDC data has been used to supplement and to add to the global estimates of modern slavery for children and also for victims of sexual exploitation. Fabrizio, I don't know if you have any other points for that are lacking data.
Yeah, I would in terms of topic, as you mentioned, of course, child trafficking or victims of child victims of trafficking are, of course, one point. In terms of geographical coverage, that is quite interesting. From our experience with the global report, we have countries we would expect that is connected with capacity, and that is the case to a certain extent. But we have some countries, like I mentioned, the Netherlands, that have a great history of good data, that they administrative data that have been collected for decades. But at the same time, also in Sub-Saharan Africa, we have the good example of the Nigerian ICAT that has fantastic data, or in Guatemala, or in many other countries. So it is connected to capacity and to income or GDP, but only to a certain extent. So there is also the let's say priorities of national authorities to have trafficking persons and data on trafficking persons as one element of their counter-trafficking activity. So, and this ICS-TIP and the manuals is really, let's say, the approach is to have a global that can be used globally at every level and for any institution.
Thank you, Claire and Fabrizio. Very interesting indeed to see the cross-regional application of all this material, and also was important to see some concrete examples that you shared with us, some practices and lessons actually. So,
hi Francesco, I think I found it. It's
please.
Donia, where will the manual be uploaded? It's exciting. Thank you. It's exciting for us too. It will be, I think this is still to be confirmed, but I expect on CTDC, we'll put it there, also on the future protection platform. I don't know also if UNODC has specific plans on that.
Yeah, it will be uploaded in our website together with the web page of the global report. We will upload it there.
Perfect. Thank you, Claire, for identifying the question. Thank you, Daniel, for asking. So I think we have reached the end of this session today. I would like to thank you all for taking the time to participate to this first webinar of the series on trafficking in persons, data and research. And for your engagement and participation, I would like also to thank, of course, our speakers for their presentation and the additional materials provided to advance the discussion on trafficking in person, administrative data standards and tools. Last but definitely not the least, I would like to thank all the ICAT members for contributing and promoting this webinar series, the ICAT Secretariat and UNODC Notes Tech team for their excellent support and hard work to make this happen, and the two 2023 ICAT co-chairs for spearheading this initiative. Thank you everyone again, and I wish you a nice rest of the day. Goodbye everyone.